Document Part 6. The days following the ambush were tense. The alien patrol had been delayed, but it was only a matter of time before they regrouped and resumed their march toward the refugee camp. Jack knew they couldn't afford another direct confrontation, not with their limited resources and growing casualties. They needed a new approach, something that would keep the aliens off balance. While buying more time for the refugees to evacuate, Lily spent most of her time hunched over maps and blueprints, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had spread out documents across the bunker's main table, marking key locations with pins and string. Her eyes darted between the alien communication device and the hastily scribbled notes she'd taken during its decoding. Beside her, Clara worked silently, sketching designs for traps and modifications to their weapons. "We can't just keep hitting them head-on," Lily said, breaking the silence. "They're learning our tactics. If we don't change things up, they'll figure us out." Jack leaned against the wall, arms crossed as he listened. "What do you suggest?" Lily tapped a spot on the map with her finger. "There's an old dam about 10 miles upstream from the pass. It's abandoned, but if we sabotage it, we could flood the valley below. That would cut off their route to the camp at least temporarily." Matt frowned, scratching his beard thoughtfully. "Flooding the valley sounds risky. What if it washes away the refugees too? Or worse, what if the water doesn't drain fast enough and traps everyone downstream?" "It's controlled," Lily replied firmly. "We wouldn't destroy the dam completely, just weaken it enough to release a surge of water. It'll slow them down without causing widespread damage." Jack nodded slowly, considering the idea. "It's worth a shot. We'll need someone to get close to the dam without being seen. That's not going to be easy." "I'll go," Sarah volunteered immediately. She stood near the doorway, her bow slung over her shoulder. "I know the area. I used to hunt there before all this started." "Not alone," Jack said, shaking his head. "You'll take Emily and Daniel with you. Stick together and stay low. If anything goes wrong, signal us." Sarah hesitated but nodded. "All right. When do we leave?" "As soon as possible." Jack replied, "Every hour counts." The journey to the dam was quiet and uneventful. Sarah led the small team through dense woods, avoiding open areas where they might be spotted. Emily carried a backpack filled with tools and explosives, while Daniel kept watch, his spear ready in case of trouble. The rain-soaked ground made movement difficult, but the storm clouds had cleared, leaving the sky bright and clear. When they reached the dam, they paused behind a cluster of bushes to assess the situation. The structure was old and crumbling, its concrete surface cracked and covered in moss. A thin trickle of water flowed over the edge, feeding into the river below. But despite its age, the dam still held firm, blocking the flow of the reservoir behind. This is it," Sarah whispered, pointing to a section of the wall that looked particularly weak. "If we plant the charges here, it should create enough pressure to break the seal." Emily knelt beside her, pulling out a coil of wire and several small explosive charges. "How much force are we talking about?" "Nervously enough to send a wave downstream," Sarah replied. "But not enough to wipe out the valley. Just need to make it look like an accident." Daniel scanned the area, his grip tightening on his spear. "What about guards? Do you think they've posted anyone here?" Sarah shook her head. "Doubt it. This place has been abandoned for years. They probably don't even know it exists." So, the team moved cautiously. Emily and Daniel set to work planting the charges, carefully positioning them along the weakest part of the dam. Sarah kept watch, her bow at the ready. The minutes ticked by slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, Emily gave a thumbs up. "It's done. Let's get out of here." Before they could retreat, however, the sound of footsteps echoed through the air. Sarah froze, her heart pounding as she turned toward the noise. Emerging from the trees was a group of alien scouts, their glowing weapons scanning the area. "They must have followed us," Daniel hissed, panic creeping into his voice. "Stay calm," Sarah whispered back. "We can still do this. Just wait for my signal." The aliens moved closer, their attention focused on the dam itself. One of them stepped directly onto the section where the explosives were hidden. Sarah raised her bow, aiming carefully. With a soft twang, an arrow flew through the air, striking the alien in the neck. It collapsed instantly, triggering the others to spin around in confusion. "Now," Sarah shouted. Emily pressed the detonator, and the dam erupted in a deafening roar. Cracks spiderwebbed across the concrete, sending chunks of debris tumbling into the river below. Water surged forward, creating a massive wave that swept the aliens off their feet. The team didn't wait to see the aftermath. They bolted into the forest, disappearing into the underbrush just as the aliens began to recover. Back at the bunker, the mood was tense but hopeful. Jack greeted the team as they returned, relief washing over him when he saw they were unharmed. "Did it work?" he asked immediately. Sarah nodded, brushing dirt and leaves from her jacket. "The valley's flooded. They won't be able to cross anytime soon." "That buys us some time," Jack said, allowing himself a small smile. "Good job," but the celebration was short-lived. Later that evening, Kyle approached Jack with urgent news. "There's a problem," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I overheard some of the newer recruits talking. One of them, I think. His name is Greg. He's been sneaking out at night, meeting with someone outside the bunker." Jack's expression darkened. "Are you sure?" Kyle nodded. "I followed him last night. He met with one of them, an alien. I don't know what they talked about, but it didn't look friendly." Jack clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Wasn't sure," Kyle admitted. "I wanted to be certain before accusing anyone." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, keep an eye on him. Don't let him know we're onto him. In the meantime, we need to tighten security. No one leaves the bunker without clearance." The next morning, the resistance gathered for a briefing. Jack stood at the front of the room, his expression grim. "We've got a traitor in our midst," he announced bluntly. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, disbelief and suspicion spreading like wildfire. "Who is it?" someone demanded. "4. "Now, it doesn't matter," Jack replied. "What matters is that we protect ourselves. From now on, everyone sticks together. No exceptions." Greg sat near the back of the room, his face pale but otherwise unreadable. He avoided eye contact, pretending to focus on adjusting his gear. Beside him, Paul exchanged a worried glance with Ben. After the meeting, Jack pulled Lily aside. "We need to deal with this quickly," he said quietly. "If Greg's working with the aliens, he could lead them straight to us." Lily nodded, her expression troubled.
Wow.
"Do you think he's acting alone?" "I don't know," Jack admitted. "But I'm not taking any chances." Night. Jack stationed himself near the entrance of the bunker, keeping a close watch on Greg. Sure enough, just after midnight, the man slipped out, moving silently through the shadows. Jack signaled for Matt and Kyle to follow him, staying far enough back to avoid detection. Greg led them to a secluded clearing deep in the woods. Waiting for him was an alien soldier, its armor gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The creature tilted its head, emitting a series of clicks and hums. Greg responded in broken phrases, his voice trembling slightly. "He's giving them our location," Kyle whispered, his hands tightening around his weapon. Jack hesitated, torn between anger and caution. Attacking now would expose them, but letting Greg continue could doom the entire resistance. Finally, he made his decision. "Take him out," he murmured, quietly. Kyle nodded, raising his bow. An arrow flew silently through the air, striking Greg in the chest, crumpled to the ground without a sound. The alien spun around, its weapon humming to life, but before it could react, Matt hurled a spear, piercing its throat. It staggered backward, collapsing beside Greg's lifeless body. The trio retreated swiftly, melting back into the darkness. When they returned to the bunker, Jack called another emergency meeting. "Greg betrayed us," he said simply, his voice cold and steady. "He paid the price for it. Let this be a lesson to all of you. Loyalty isn't optional. Anyone who turns against us puts everyone at risk." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the group. For a moment, fear lingered in the air, but beneath it was a steely resolve. They had come too far to let betrayal tear them apart. As the meeting ended, Lily approached Jack, her expression weary but determined. "This changes nothing," she said softly. We keep fighting, no matter what. Jack nodded, his jaw tight. Yeah, we keep fighting and fight. They would for every life lost, for every hope shattered, and for the fragile future they refused to surrender. Document. Part 1. The sky was an unnatural shade of orange, streaked with trails of smoke and ash. The air smelled of burnt metal and fear. In the distance, the hum of alien engines vibrated through the ground, a constant reminder that humanity's days might be numbered. People ran in every direction, some screaming, others silent with shock. Cars were abandoned on the highways, their doors left open as if their owners had simply vanished. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't chaos. Was the end of everything people thought they knew. Jack tightened his grip on the rifle slung over his shoulder. He stood on the rooftop of a crumbling apartment building, scanning the horizon with a pair of binoculars. His face was weathered, marked by years spent outdoors, and his brown hair was streaked with gray. Jack wasn't young anymore, but he had seen enough to know when things were bad, and this was as bad as it got. The aliens had arrived 3 days ago, and already they'd torn through half the planet like it was nothing. Their ships hovered above cities, massive and gleaming, firing beams of light that could melt steel in seconds. No one knew what they wanted or why they were here, but their intentions were clear. Earth wasn't theirs anymore, Jack. A voice called from below. He turned to see Lily climbing up the ladder to the roof. She was younger than him, maybe in her early 30s, with short blonde hair and sharp green eyes. Her hands were smeared with grease, and she carried a backpack stuffed with tools and scraps. Despite the situation, there was a determined look on her face. We've got trouble. I figured, Jack said, lowering the binoculars. What now? They're heading this way, Lily replied, pulling out a small tablet. The screen flickered as she tapped it, displaying a map dotted with red markers. Their patrols are spreading out. If we don't move soon, they'll find us. Jack sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. How long do we have? Maybe an hour? Tops. Lily shoved the tablet back into her bag. We need to get to the bunker. I sent a message to the others. They'll meet us there. Jack nodded. Though he didn't feel reassured. The bunker wasn't much a reinforced basement beneath an old warehouse, but it was the closest thing they had to safety. Still, getting there wouldn't be easy. The streets were crawling with alien drones, and even if they avoided those, the skies were patrolled by ships that could spot them from miles away. All right, Jack said finally. Let's go. The journey to the bunker was tense. Jack led the way, moving quickly but carefully through alleys and side streets. Every sound made him flinch, the scrape of boots on pavement, the distant whine of engines, occasional explosion that rattled windows and sent clouds of dust billowing into the air. Lily stayed close behind him, clutching her backpack like it was a lifeline. Neither of them spoke. There wasn't much to say. At one point, they ducked into an abandoned store to avoid a patrol. The place was dark, its shelves empty, except for a few cans of food and broken glass. Jack crouched near the window, peeking out through a crack in the boarded-up frame. Outside, 3 alien soldiers marched down the street, their movements stiff and mechanical. They were tall, at least 7 feet, with elongated limbs and skin that shimmered like oil under the dim light. Each of them carried a weapon that looked more like a piece of art than something meant to kill smooth curves and glowing panels. Humming softly as they moved. They're not even trying to hide, Lily whispered from behind him. Her voice was low, barely audible over the hum of the aliens' weapons. Like they don't think we're worth the effort. Jack didn't answer. He was too busy watching the soldiers, memorizing their patterns. When they finally passed, he gestured for Lily to follow him, and they slipped back onto the street. By the time they reached the warehouse, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the city in shadow. The building itself was unremarkable, a squat brick structure surrounded by piles of rusted machinery and discarded crates. Jack knocked twice on the heavy metal door before pushing it open. What? Faint smell of mildew. A group of about 20 people huddled together in the center of the room, their faces pale and drawn. Everyone's here, Lily said, glancing around. Good. Jack stepped forward, addressing the group. Listen up, he said, his voice firm but calm. We don't have much time. Those things are spreading out, and they're going to find us sooner or later. Our best bet is to stay hidden and wait for reinforcements. A man in the corner raised his hand hesitantly. Reinforcements? From where? The army's gone. The government's gone. We're on our own. He's right, another woman added, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Point, we can't fight them? Look at what they did to New York, to London, to Tokyo. They wiped them off the map in hours. The room fell silent. Jack could feel the weight of their despair pressing down on him. He understood it. He really did, but giving up wasn't an option. Not yet. That's why we're still alive, he said after a moment. Because we haven't given up. Because we've adapted. And because we've got someone who might just have a plan? He nodded toward Lily. All eyes turned to her. Lily shifted uncomfortably under their gaze, but squared her shoulders. Okay, she began, setting her backpack on. The floor? Here's the thing. These aliens, they're advanced, sure. Their technology is incredible, but it's also their weakness. What do you mean? Someone asks. I mean, they're expecting us to fight them with guns, missiles, all the usual stuff. But what if we don't? What if we use something they won't expect? Jack frowned. Like what? Lily opened her bag and pulled out a bow. It was simple, made of wood and string, but sturdy enough to hold its shape. This, she said, holding it up, primitive weapons, bows, arrows, spears, anything that doesn't rely on electricity or signals. Their armor's designed to stop high-tech attacks, but it's vulnerable to basic physics. The room erupted into murmurs. Some people looked skeptical, others intrigued. Jack studied the bow in Lily's hands, then glanced at her face. There was a spark in her eyes, a quiet confidence that made him believe her. It's worth a shot, he said finally. But we'll need more than just one bow, I know, Lily replied. That's why we're going shopping. Hour later, Jack and Lily crept through the ruins of a sporting goods store, gathering whatever they could find. Arrows, crossbows, knives, even baseball bats, all of it went into their bags. The place was eerily quiet, the shelves half empty but untouched by looters. Most people hadn't thought to come here. They'd been too focused on survival to consider something as simple as a bow as they worked. Jack couldn't help but wonder if Lily was right. Could humanity's oldest tools really stand a chance against an enemy that seemed invincible? He didn't know, but he was willing to try. For now, that was enough. When they finished loading up, they headed back to the warehouse. The streets were darker now, the city shrouded in shadows. Above them, the alien ships drifted silently, their lights cutting through the gloom like watchful eyes. Jack kept his head down, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. Beside him, Lily adjusted the strap of her backpack, her expression resolute. They weren't soldiers, they weren't heroes, but they were still standing, and that counted for something. Document. Part 2. The bunker was alive with quiet activity. People moved around the dimly lit space, organizing supplies and checking weapons. The air smelled faintly of damp concrete and rusted metal, but no one seemed to notice. Everyone was focused on Lily's plan, or at least trying to wrap their heads around it. Jack stood near the center of the room, leaning against a wooden table covered in maps and scattered gear. He watched as Lily demonstrated how to string a bow for a group of curious survivors. This is the basics, she said, her tone calm but firm. She held up the bow, its smooth wooden surface catching the flickering light from a nearby lantern. You pull back the string, load an arrow, and aim. It's not complicated, but it takes practice. She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of each person. We don't have much time, so you'll need to learn fast. A young man named Aaron raised his hand hesitantly. His hands were shaking slightly, and there was a nervous edge to his voice when he spoke. What if it doesn't work? What if their armor really is as strong as it looks? Lily set the bow down and crossed her arms. It's not about whether their armor is strong. It's about how we hit them. Their technology is advanced, sure, but it's also predictable. They're expecting lasers, missiles, anything high-tech. A simple arrow. It's something they won't see coming. Jack nodded, stepping forward. She's right. These things rely on patterns. we break those patterns, we might stand a chance. He paused, letting his words sink in. But it's not just about the weapons. We need to think differently. Hit hard, hit fast, and get out before they can react. The group murmured among themselves, some nodding, while others still looked unsure. Jack could see the doubt in their faces, but he didn't blame them. This wasn't exactly a battle-tested strategy. It was a gamble. Still, it was better than sitting around waiting to die. Later that night, Jack sat alone in a corner of the bunker, cleaning his knife. The blade was worn but still sharp, its edges gleaming faintly in the low light. He worked slowly, his movements deliberate, as if the act of sharpening the weapon could somehow clear his mind. Across the room, Lily was bent over a pile of arrows, attaching small pieces of flint to their tips. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her fingers moving quickly despite the fatigue etched into her face. "You really think this will work?" Jack asked, suddenly breaking the silence. Lily looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "Honestly, I don't know. But we've got to try something, right? Sitting here isn't going to save anyone." Jack grunted, turning the knife over in his hands. "I'm not saying it's a bad idea. Just risky. These things are smart. If they figure out what we're doing, we're dead." "They won't," Lily replied firmly. "Not if we're careful. Not if we stay unpredictable." Jack studied her for a moment, noting the determination in her eyes. There was something almost stubborn about the way she refused to give up. Even when the odds were stacked so heavily against them, he admired that, though he'd never admit it out loud. "All right," he said finally. "Let's test it tomorrow. See if your theory holds up." The next morning, the group gathered outside the warehouse, hidden among the ruins of an old industrial park. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds that threatened rain. Jack led a small team himself, Lily, and 3 others into the surrounding woods. Each of them carried a bow or crossbow, along with a quiver of arrows. The plan was simple. Find an alien patrol, take them by surprise, and retreat before reinforcements arrived. It didn't take long to spot their target. About half a mile into the forest, they came across a trio of alien soldiers. The creatures moved methodically, scanning the area with handheld devices that emitted soft beeping sounds. Their armor shimmered in the dappled sunlight, reflecting the colors of the trees around them. Jack signaled for the group to stop, crouching behind a fallen log. "Remember," he whispered, glancing at each member of the team. "Aim for weak points, the joints, the neck, anywhere the armor doesn't. Cover, and don't stick around once you've fired." Everyone nodded, their faces tense but focused. Lily adjusted her grip on her bow, her knuckles white against the wood. Jack gave her a reassuring nod before raising his own weapon. The first shot came from Sarah, one of the other team members. Her arrow flew silently through the air, striking one of the aliens in the side of the neck. The creature staggered, clutching at the shaft embedded in its flesh, before collapsing to the ground. The other 2 aliens turned sharply, their weapons humming as they scanned the trees. "Now," Jack hissed. Arrows rained down from all directions, each one finding its mark. One alien went down immediately, pierced through the knee and shoulder. The third managed to raise its weapon, firing a burst of energy that sent sparks flying from a nearby tree trunk. But before it could fire again, Lily's arrow struck it in the throat, silencing it forever. The entire encounter lasted less than a minute. When the last alien fell, the group froze, listening for any sign of movement. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the distant chirping of birds. Slowly, Jack stood, motioning for the others to follow him. "Good job," he said quietly. As they approached the bodies, "Let's grab what we can and get out of here." Back at the bunker, the mood was electric. The team had returned with fragments of alien armor and one intact weapon, which Lily immediately began examining. The others gathered around, eager to hear what had happened. Jack recounted the ambush in detail, emphasizing how effective the primitive weapons had been. "It worked," Lily said, holding up a piece of the alien's armor. "Look at this. Materials designed to deflect energy, but it can't handle blunt force. Our arrows pierce straight through. The group erupted into excited chatter, their earlier doubts replaced by cautious optimism. Even Aaron, who had been the most skeptical, looked impressed. "So what's next?" someone asked. Jack exchanged a glance with Lily. "We keep hitting them. Small teams, quick strikes. We can't take them head on, but we can wear them down." Over. The next few days, the resistance launched several more attacks, each one more successful than the last. They targeted isolated patrols, supply depots, and communication relays, using guerrilla tactics to maximize their impact. Word of their success spread quickly, drawing more people to the bunker. Among the newcomers were skilled individuals who proved invaluable. A former hunter named Matt, who could track prey through the densest forests. A mechanic named Rachel, who helped modify the bows for greater accuracy. And a medic named Chris, who patched up wounds with steady hands and a calm demeanor. As the group grew, so did their confidence. They began experimenting with new strategies, combining traditional weapons with clever traps and ambushes. Lily spent hours crafting poison-tipped arrows, testing different mixtures to find the most effective toxins. Jack, meanwhile, focused on training the recruits, teaching them how to move silently and strike decisively, despite their growing strength. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with fire. Every victory brought them closer to retaliation, and he knew the aliens wouldn't tolerate being hunted for long. Still, he pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. For now, they were winning, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack stood on the roof of the warehouse, staring out at the scarred cityscape. Behind him, the bunker buzzed with activity, the sound of laughter, and conversation drifting up from below. He allowed himself a small smile, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in days. They weren't soldiers, they weren't heroes. But they were fighting back, and that counted for something. Document. Part 3. The resistance was growing stronger, but the weight of their situation pressed down on everyone. Each victory came at a cost, and the scars, both physical and emotional, were starting to show. Jack stood in the corner of the bunker, watching as Lily worked tirelessly to improve their arsenal. She had set up a makeshift workshop, using scraps of metal and tools scavenged from abandoned buildings. Her hands moved quickly, shaping arrowheads and testing new poisons she'd brewed from plants found in the forest. Despite her focus, there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Nearby, Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, sharpening arrows with a small whetstone. Her movements were steady, but her jaw was clenched tightly, betraying the tension beneath her calm exterior. Across the room, Matt leaned against a wall, cleaning his hunting knife, while recounting stories of tracking deer in the wilderness. His voice was low and steady, meant to keep spirits up. But even he couldn't hide the edge of exhaustion in his tone. "We've got to keep moving," Jack said suddenly, breaking the quiet hum of activity. Everyone turned to look at him there, expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "We're getting too comfortable here. Sooner or later they'll find us." Lily paused in her work, setting down a half-finished arrowhead. "He's right," she said, glancing around the room. "Every time we strike, we leave traces, broken branches, footprints. It all adds up. They start connecting the dots. This place won't be safe anymore." A young woman named Emily spoke up hesitantly. She had joined the group only a week ago, her face still bearing the marks of recent trauma. "But where would we go? This bunker's the best chance we have." "It's not about finding another bunker," Jack replied, stepping closer to the group. "It's about staying unpredictable. We need to spread out, hit them harder, and make sure they never know where we'll strike next." Rachel, the mechanic, nodded thoughtfully. "What if we split into smaller teams? That way, we can cover more ground without putting everyone in danger." Jack considered this for a moment. It's risky, but it could work. Smaller groups are harder to track. To make sure each team has someone who knows what they're doing. The next morning, the group divided into 3 teams. Jack led one, Lily another, and Matt took charge of the third. Each team carried a mix of weapons: bows, crossbows, spears, and knives, enough supplies to last a few days. Before heading out, Jack gathered everyone together for a final briefing. "Stay sharp," he said, his voice firm but calm. "Stick to the plan and don't take unnecessary risks. If you run into trouble, get out fast. We can't afford to lose anyone." As the teams dispersed, Jack's mind raced with doubts. Splitting up made sense strategically, but it also left them vulnerable. He pushed those thoughts aside, reminding himself that hesitation wouldn't help anyone. They had come this far by trusting each other, and now wasn't the time to second-guess that trust. Jack's team consisted of Sarah, 2 recruits named Daniel and Maria, and Chris, the medic. Their mission was to scout an area near the outskirts of the city where alien patrols had been spotted frequently. The journey was tense, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Jack led the way, his rifle slung over his shoulder and a bow in his hand. Behind him, Sarah kept watch, her eyes scanning the forest for any sign of movement. After hours of careful navigation, they reached their destination, a narrow valley surrounded by dense woods. From their vantage point on a ridge, they could see a cluster of alien soldiers setting up some kind of device near a rocky outcrop. The machine emitted a low hum, its surface pulsing faintly with light. "What do you think it is?" Daniel whispered, crouching beside Jack. "Not sure," Jack replied, narrowing his eyes. "Could be a communication relay, or maybe something worse." Sarah adjusted her grip on her bow. "Either way, we should take it out." Jack hesitated, weighing their options. Attacking such a large group would be dangerous, but leaving the device intact could put the entire region at risk. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But we need to be smart about this. Set traps first, then hit them hard and fast." Over the next hour, the team worked silently to prepare an ambush. Using rope and fallen branches, they created tripwires designed to knock the aliens off balance. Sarah crafted crude snares from vines, positioning them along likely escape routes. Meanwhile, Jack and Chris gathered rocks to use as improvised projectiles, stacking them near the edge of the ridge. When everything was ready, Jack gave the signal. The first arrow flew straight and true, striking one of the aliens in the back of the knee. The creature stumbled, its weapon clattering to the ground as it let out a guttural cry. The others turned sharply, their glowing weapons scanning the trees for the source of the attack. "Now," Jack shouted. Arrows rained down from above, each one finding its mark. The aliens scrambled, firing blindly into the forest, but their shots missed wildly. One of them triggered a tripwire, sending it sprawling to the ground. Another stepped into a snare, its leg caught in the tight loop of vine. Within minutes, the patrol was in disarray. "Move," Jack ordered, leading the charge down the ridge. The team descended quickly, finishing off the remaining aliens with close-range attacks. Sarah drove an arrow into the throat of one struggling creature, while Daniel used a spear to dispatch another. Chris stayed back, keeping an eye out for injuries. But the fight ended almost as soon as it began. When the last alien fell, the group regrouped around the mysterious device. It continued to hum softly, its lights flickering erratically. "What do we do with this thing?" Maria asked, poking it cautiously with the tip of her spear. "Destroy it," Jack said firmly. He pulled out a small explosive charge Rachel had given him, attaching it to the base of the machine. "Everyone back up." They retreated to a safe distance, watching as the charge detonated with a sharp crack. The device shattered into pieces, its humming abruptly silenced. For a moment, no one spoke, the weight of what they'd just done sinking in. Back at the rendezvous point, the other teams began arriving, each carrying reports of successful missions. Lily's group had ambushed a supply convoy, seizing crates of alien rations and medical supplies. Matt's team had destroyed a drone outpost, crippling the aliens' ability to monitor the surrounding area. As the groups shared their stories, a sense of cautious optimism began to spread. "We're hitting them where it hurts," Lily said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "They're not invincible," no, Jack agreed, "but they're still dangerous. Don't forget that." Despite the victories, the toll of constant fighting was becoming apparent. Chris tended to several minor wounds, including a deep gash on Daniel's arm caused by a stray piece of shrapnel. Others nursed bruises and scrapes, their bodies weary from days spent on high alert. Even Lily, usually so focused, seemed drained. Her shoulders slumped as she reviewed maps by lantern light. Still, the resistance pressed on. With every skirmish, they grew bolder, their tactics more refined. They learned to read the aliens' patterns, exploiting weaknesses in their armor and behavior. Simple weapons became extensions of their will, tools of survival in a world that had turned hostile overnight. That night, as the group settled in for rest, Jack found himself staring at the stars through a gap in the bunker's ceiling. The sky was clearer than usual, the constellations shining brightly despite the chaos below. He thought about how far they'd come since the aliens' arrival, how much they'd lost, and how much they still stood to gain. They underestimated. "Us," Lily said softly, appearing beside him. She held a cup of tea in her hands, the steam rising in gentle curls. "They thought we'd crumble under their technology. Instead, we adapted." Jack nodded, though his expression remained somber. "For now, yeah, but this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Lily smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "No, it's not. But we've proven something important. Humanity's strength doesn't come from machines or weapons. It comes from our ability to adapt, to survive. And that's something they'll never understand." Jack didn't respond immediately, letting her words hang in the air. First time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope, not because they were winning, but because they were still standing. Against all odds, they were still fighting. And as long as they kept fighting, there was a chance, however small, that they might win. Document. Part 4. The resistance had grown beyond what anyone could have imagined. What started as a ragtag group of survivors huddled in a bunker had turned into a network of fighters spread across the region. Word of their success with primitive weapons had spread, drawing people from all walks of life. Farmers, teachers, mechanics, and even former soldiers joined the cause, each bringing their own skills to the fight. The bunker was no longer just a hiding place. It had become a hub of activity, and buzzing with energy and purpose. Jack stood outside the warehouse, leaning against the rusted metal wall as he watched new recruits arrive. A line of people stretched down the road, carrying whatever they could: salvage tools, food, scraps of clothing. Some looked scared, others determined, but all shared one thing: a refusal to give up. Among them was a man named Paul, a burly farmer with calloused hands and a quiet demeanor. Beside him walked a woman named Clara, her arms filled with books. On engineering and physics, she smiled nervously as she passed Jack, offering a small wave. "More every day," Lily said, stepping up beside him. Her voice was calm but tinged with exhaustion. "It's good, but it's also risky. The more people we have, the harder it is to keep everyone safe." Jack nodded, his eyes still on the crowd. "We'll manage, we don't have a choice." Inside the bunker, the atmosphere was chaotic but hopeful. Newcomers were assigned tasks based on their skills. Those with experience in combat joined training sessions led by Jack and Matt, learning how to use bows, spears, and traps effectively. Others helped Rachel modify weapons or assisted Lily in crafting poison-tipped arrows. Ben, a blacksmith who had arrived a few days earlier, set up a forge in a corner of the warehouse, forging crude but sturdy blades from scrap metal. Despite the progress, tensions began to rise. The influx of new members brought differing opinions on how to proceed. Some wanted to escalate the attacks, striking deeper into alien-held territory. Others argued for caution, urging the group to focus on survival rather than aggression. These disagreements often spilled into heated arguments, fracturing the unity that had once defined the resistance. One evening, after a particularly loud debate, Jack called a meeting. The group gathered in the main chamber, their faces illuminated by flickering lanterns. He stood at the front, his expression serious but calm. "We're not going to agree on everything," he began, his voice steady. "And that's okay. But we can't let our differences tear us apart. We're stronger together, and if we start fighting among ourselves, we've already lost." Lily stepped forward, nodding in agreement. "Jack's right. Our goal is simple: survive. Everything else how we fight. Where we strike, that's secondary. What matters is that we stay united. Her words seemed to ease some of the tension, though not everyone looked convinced. A young man named Kyle, who had been vocal about launching larger-scale attacks, crossed his arms defiantly. "Survival isn't enough," he said, his tone sharp. "We don't push back now, they'll crush us later. They're planning something big. Guy can feel it." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I get it, Kyle. Believe me, I do. But rushing in blind won't help anyone. Need to be smart about this." The argument ended there, but the unease lingered. Jack knew Kyle wasn't alone in his frustration. Many of the newer recruits were eager to take the fight to the aliens, driven by anger and desperation. While their passion was admirable, it also made them reckless, a dangerous combination when facing an enemy as advanced as the invaders. The next morning, Lily approached Jack as he prepared for another scouting mission. She carried a small device in her hands, its surface covered in wires and blinking lights. "I think I found something," she said, her voice low but excited. One of the recruits brought this back from an alien outpost. "It's part of their communication system." Jack raised an eyebrow, taking the device from her. "What does it do?" "I'm not sure yet," Lily admitted. "But I've been studying it, and I think it might let us listen in on their transmissions. If we can figure out what they're planning, we'll have the upper hand." "That's a big if," Jack replied, turning the device over in his hands. "Can you crack it?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. "I'll need time and help. Clara's been working with me, and she's good with technology. Between the two of us, I think we can make it work." Jack handed the device back to her. "All right, just be careful." I know," Lily interrupted, her expression hardening. "We'll be careful." Later that day, Jack led a team into the forest to test a new strategy. Instead of ambushing alien patrols directly, they planned to lure them into a trap using decoys. Armed with a bow, positioned herself near a clearing while the rest of the team hid in the trees. Using pieces of fabric and broken machinery, they created makeshift dummies designed to look like humans from a distance. When an alien patrol approached, drawn by the sight of the decoys, the team sprang into action. Arrows flew from multiple directions, striking the aliens with precision. The creatures scrambled, firing wildly as they tried to locate their attackers. One of them triggered a tripwire, sending a net crashing down on top of it. Another stepped into a pit lined with sharpened stakes, letting out a guttural scream as it fell. Within minutes, the patrol was neutralized. Jack signaled for the team to regroup, his expression grim but satisfied. "Good work," he said quietly. "Let's grab what we can and get out of here." As they searched the bodies for supplies, Sarah knelt beside one of the fallen aliens, examining its weapon. "Why do they keep underestimating us?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. "They're so advanced, but they act like we're nothing." Jack crouched beside her, his eyes scanning the creature's armor. "Because they don't understand us. To them, we're just animals, primitive, unworthy of respect. That's why they didn't expect us to fight back like this." Sarah frowned, her fingers brushing against a strange symbol etched into the alien's chest plate. "Do you think they'll ever learn?" "They'll learn," Jack replied, standing up. "Maybe too late." Back at the bunker, Lily and Clara worked tirelessly on the alien device. Hours turned into days as they pored over its components, deciphering its functions piece by piece. Finally, late one night, they succeeded. The device emitted a series of clicks and hums, followed by a distorted voice speaking in an unfamiliar language. Clara adjusted the settings, filtering out the static until the message became clearer. "Coordinates," she said, her eyes wide with excitement. "They're planning something big, an attack. And it's happening soon." Lily's heart raced as she scribbled down the information. "We need to tell Jack." When Jack heard the news, he immediately called another meeting. The group gathered around the map-covered table, their faces tense with anticipation. Lily explained what she and Clara had discovered, pointing to a location marked on the map. "This is where they're targeting next," she said, her voice firm. "A refugee camp about 20 miles from here. If we don't stop them, thousands of people will die." The room fell silent. Jack studied the map, his mind racing. "Can't let that happen," he said finally. "But we can't face them head-on either. We'll need to hit them before they reach the camp." "How?" someone asked. Jack glanced at Lily, then back at the group. "We'll need everything we've got. Every weapon, every trap, every person willing to fight. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves." The group nodded, their earlier disagreements forgotten in the face of a greater threat. For the first time in days, there was unity in the room, shared determination to stand against the invaders. As the meeting broke up, Jack pulled Lily aside. "You did good," he said, his voice soft. "This changes everything." Lily shook her head, her expression somber. "Not yet. Wait. But it will." Outside, the sky was dark, the stars obscured by clouds. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, but no one noticed. Inside the bunker, plans were being made, strategies formed. The resistance was ready to fight, not just for themselves, but for the future of humanity, and for the first time in weeks, Jack allowed himself to believe they might actually win. Document Part 5. The rain began just after midnight. Steady drizzle that soaked the ground and turned the forest paths into muddy trails. Jack stood at the edge of the clearing, his hood pulled low over his face to shield himself from the downpour. Behind him, the resistance moved quietly through the trees, their weapons wrapped in oilcloth to keep them dry. The air was thick with tension, every sound magnified by the silence of the storm. The mission ahead was risky, but they had no choice. They didn't stop the aliens before they reached the refugee camp. Countless innocent lives would be lost. Lily walked beside him, her boots squelching in the mud as she adjusted the straps of her backpack. Inside were several makeshift explosives, carefully crafted from materials scavenged during previous raids. She glanced up at Jack, her green eyes reflecting the faint glow of distant lightning. "You think this will work?" she asked her. Voice barely audible over the patter of raindrops. "It has to," Jack replied, his tone firm but laced with uncertainty. He gestured toward the map tucked inside his jacket. "We've got one shot at this. If we can ambush them here, where the terrain funnels them into a narrow pass, we might stand a chance." Lily nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "And if something goes wrong, then we improvise," Jack said simply. He turned to address the group, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the storm. "Listen up. Stick to the plan, stay sharp, stay quiet, and don't take unnecessary risks. If things go south, fall back to the fallback point wheel, regroup there." The team murmured their understanding, their faces pale but resolute under the dim light of their lanterns. Matt stepped forward, gripping his spear tightly. "What about the decoys? Should we set them up now?" Jack shook his head. "Not yet. Wait until we're in position. We need to make sure they lead the patrol straight into the trap." The journey to the ambush site was grueling. The rain made the forest treacherous, with slippery roots and hidden puddles threatening to send anyone off balance. The group moved slowly, careful not to leave obvious tracks or disturb the natural landscape too much. Every step felt like an eternity, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on them. When they finally reached the narrow pass, Jack signaled for everyone to stop. The area was perfect, a steep slope on one side and dense underbrush on the other, leaving only a single path wide enough for the alien patrol to traverse. Lily and Clara immediately set to work planting explosives along the edges of the trail, burying them beneath layers of leaves and dirt. Others positioned tripwires and sharpened stakes, creating obstacles designed to slow the aliens down. As the preparations continued, Sarah climbed higher up the slope, finding a vantage point where she could monitor the approach. Her bow was slung across her back, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Below her, Emily and Daniel worked together to assemble the decoys, using scrap metal and cloth to create crude imitations of human figures. They positioned the dummies near the entrance of the pass, ensuring they were visible enough to draw attention. By the time everything was set, the rain had eased slightly, though the clouds still hung heavy overhead. Jack gathered the team for a final check. "Everyone knows their role?" he asked, scanning their faces. One by one, they confirmed their readiness. Kyle, who had been vocal about taking more aggressive action, clenched his fists but nodded. Reluctantly. Even Paul, the farmer-turned-fighter, looked determined despite his lack of combat experience. "Good," Jack said, his voice steady. "Remember, our goal is to slow them down, not hold them off forever. Once they're tangled up in the traps, hit them hard and fast, then get out. No heroes tonight." It wasn't long before the sound of alien footsteps echoed through the forest. The patrol moved cautiously, their glowing weapons casting eerie shadows on the trees. At the front of the group, 2 scouts scanned the area, their movements methodical and precise. When they spotted the decoys, they signaled for the others to halt. Jack held his breath, watching from his hiding spot behind a cluster of rocks. Beside him, Lily gripped her bow tightly, her knuckles white against the wood. The seconds stretched into minutes as the aliens approached, their armor glinting faintly in the dim light. Finally, one of the creatures stepped onto a tripwire. With a sharp snap, the wire tightened, sending a log swinging down from above. Now, struck the alien squarely in the chest, knocking it off its feet. Chaos erupted as the rest of the patrol scrambled to respond, firing blindly into the trees. "Now," Jack shouted. Arrows flew from all directions, striking the aliens with deadly accuracy. Explosions rocked the trail as Lily's charges detonated, sending debris flying and forcing the patrol to retreat further into the pass. The resistance fighters moved quickly, picking off targets from the shadows while avoiding direct confrontation. Despite their initial success, the aliens adapted quickly. One of them activated some kind of device, emitting a high-pitched whine that disrupted the team's coordination. Several recruits froze, disoriented by the noise, and were nearly caught in the crossfire. "Fall back," Jack yelled, realizing the tide was turning. To the fallback point. The group retreated as ordered, moving swiftly through the forest. Behind them, the aliens pursued, their weapons humming ominously. Jack brought up the rear, ensuring no one was left behind. When they finally reached the fallback point, a rocky outcrop overlooking a river, he signaled for everyone to take cover. "We drew them away from the camp," Lily said, panting as she joined him. "That's something, at least." "For now," Jack replied grimly. "But they'll regroup soon, and next time, they'll come harder." Back at the bunker, the mood was subdued. While the ambush had succeeded in delaying the alien attack, the cost had been high. 2 recruits had been injured during the retreat, and one, a young man named Marcus, hadn't made it back. His death weighed heavily on the group, casting a shadow over their earlier victories. Clara sat alone in a corner of the room, staring blankly at the alien communication device she and Lily had deciphered. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched a small notebook filled with notes and sketches. Nearby, Ben worked silently at his forge, hammering out new arrowheads with mechanical precision. Jack watched them from a distance, his heart heavy, but his resolve unshaken. He knew grief was inevitable in war, but it didn't make the losses any easier to bear. Still, he couldn't afford to dwell on it, not when so much was at stake. "We did good today," Lily said softly, stepping up beside him. Her voice was hoarse from shouting during the battle, but her words carried conviction. "Marcus knew the risks. So did the rest of us. That doesn't mean we stop fighting." Jack nodded, though his expression remained somber. "I know, but I can't help wondering. How many more will we lose before this is over?" Lily placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm but comforting. "As many as it takes," she said quietly, "'cause giving up isn't an option." Later that night, Jack found himself standing outside the warehouse, staring up at the stars. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the air crisp and cool. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a world without fear, a world where humanity thrived, free from the threat of invasion. But the image was fleeting, replaced by the harsh reality of their situation. Behind him, Kyle approached hesitantly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice tentative. Jack turned to face him, his arms crossed over his chest. "What is it?" Kyle hesitated, then sighed. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry about earlier. I was angry, and I let it cloud my judgment. You were right. We can't afford to divide ourselves. Jack studied him for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. Just remember, we're all in this together. No matter how frustrated you get, we can't afford to let our emotions get in the way. Kyle nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Understood. Thanks, Jack. As Kyle walked away, Jack returned his gaze to the horizon. The stars twinkled faintly, their light a reminder of hope in an otherwise dark world. They weren't soldiers. They weren't heroes. But they were still standing in, as long as they kept fighting. There was a chance, however small, that they might win, and sometimes that was enough.